thank you all for joining me today. It's April 29th, 2020. We're live on Facebook as well, and I thought I'd just check in to see how everyone's doing. I have a few thoughts that we can talk about, but if people have questions, feel free to either throw them in the chat or grab my attention and ask them away. The theme I was thinking of talking about today was balance, and this is kind of motivated by a question I got by email in response to our latest newsletter. Our latest newsletter asked people who might want to volunteer on a project we're doing, which is around studying municipal prayers in councils across Canada. This is a project we've been working on for quite a while, and so it's something that we continually want more work on. But the question of balance comes up because we are in the middle of a pandemic, and the question goes, should we be working on these other projects at this time? And to some extent, we have been quieter on many of these other projects. We haven't done anything on assisted dying or the new bill at the federal government to ban conversion therapy, both things that we have a lot of positions on and things to say about. Partially that's motivated by the federal government, not by federal parliament not sitting right now. And so we can't make any, there's nothing to, no one to lobby, no one to impact on there. But on the other hand, a lot of our members are also just thinking, like I think everyone is, about coronavirus and how do we tackle this. We're now over a month though, I think, into the lockdown, depending how you count, at least a month, probably a month and a half. And at some point, we do need to find this balance between how do we make sure we're responding to the pandemic and supporting one another in that, but also how are we making sure that the other projects and the other priorities are still being advanced. So that's where I'm thinking about it from the association's perspective. I mean, you can look at this question across broader society. Right now, all of our provincial and federal political capital is focused on coronavirus, which is very important. But like I said, it's not the only issue out there, and people still need a lot of different things to happen. There are legislative agendas at both the provincial and federal levels, and making sure those continue to move along will be important. At the federal level, for example, there's a deadline on the assisted dying changes that need to come into effect. The Quebec court, I think, gave the federal government 6 months before the not reasonably foreseeable clause, it becomes nullified. I'm sure courts will extend that in the situation, but at some point, we do need to figure out how to address normalcy within the criteria of a pandemic. And so that's where I'm kind of still interested in pursuing the work that we've always done, but trying to find a way to balance it with the obvious emergent challenges that we're facing. And I guess the other aspect of balance is in terms of each of our personal life. We're all trying to balance possibly new situations, not going out as much. You could easily get caught up watching way too much news on coronavirus, watching everything that's happening, every day's new numbers. And that can feel a little bit helpful for a while. It definitely has for me, but at some point it does start to impact your mental health, and finding things to disconnect from coronavirus news can be good. And so I'm curious to hear from either those on the call, the few people watching on Facebook, or anyone else, perspectives on this, perspectives on how the association should be acting, or if you have any other questions or thoughts, I'm always happy to take those as well. I have muted you all, so you can either put them in the chat or unmute yourself to raise those. Maybe I'll just put it out there. Oh, go ahead, Dan. I see you unmuting.
I didn't want to be the first. I was waiting for Ezra to get in there. About your comments about the association activities, we did, like you said, we have different projects and campaigns, and to address those, of course, you need some sort of resources, human resources, I presume. So the question I have is, which of our projects or campaigns require the least amount of human resources, sorry, and the most? Like, what projects and campaigns can be addressed, like by yourself, for example, or where you require additional people? So that's my question.
Right. That's a good question. The one that's looking at requiring the most, physical capacity right now, most resources, are the research projects we're taking on around municipal prayers across the country, for example. That one, we want volunteers to help us analyze 3,600 different municipalities across the country. And so that's just going to take a lot of people's time Googling these different websites and seeing whether they prayed or not. So one person just posted in the chat that they didn't hear Dan. I'll just repeat that Dan asked what are taking the most or least resources of our projects. In terms of what takes a little bit less resources and what I can do mostly by myself here at the desk, a lot of the writing, a lot of the general materials that come out on our website, even these town halls, I can mostly do solo. Posting a blog on the website takes a couple hours to do it well. Setting this up is getting faster every time, and I think I've managed to get it into a nice rhythm. Last week there were a few technical glitches. I don't think the Facebook live stream worked that well, but that's going a little bit quicker. Individuals can also take on different things. I think the meetings, like the online Skype meetings you're running, Dan, with others, that takes a few people, but then it's just a matter of people showing up and having the time. So yeah, a lot of the stuff we've done traditionally has not involved too many people, because for the most part it is largely me behind the desk, but when we have additional help, that's always great.
I've got a question about the, I think you called it the Municipal Prayers Project. So you're looking for people to volunteer to help with that. If someone were to volunteer, do you have like some guidelines that you could provide to them? What's required, how to do it, so that they're not figuring it out all by themselves?
Absolutely. Based on how we did the work behind transcribing legislative prayers in BC here, where we had 50 separate volunteers, I realized I forgot to re-ask the question in case anyone couldn't hear. The question was, do we have instructions for people if they're volunteering on the Municipal Prayers Project? And like I said, we wrote up detailed instructions on how people could work on transcribing prayers at the provincial level. And we're finalizing that. And by we, I mean myself, Teal, and Ranil, who's on the board, have drafted up instructions, and those will go out to everyone who signs up on the website. People will get assigned a small number of municipalities at first to go with, and we'll go from there. I'm realizing now the audio isn't working because of the way I streamed it. So people are hearing me through my mic, but I think I'll just have to repeat anyone else's questions. And I'll have that fixed for next week. Learning process every time. I see a hand from Murray.
Just going back to, you were talking about the dying with dignity thing. I just noticed, and you probably, and I suspect that we work with them, the National Dying with Dignity is having a webinar on the very same topic you're talking about on May 6th in terms of follow-up across the country. So if people are interested, so I can send that out to everybody. It's a public webinar that's like I said, national. So.
Yeah, thanks, Murray, mentioning that there's a Dying with Dignity Canada webinar on the state of play across the country. Lots of good materials are being put online. Dying with Dignity is such an important topic, and it's in such a flux right now. We do have a chance to really help move the conversation forward in this country, particularly once the House of Commons starts sitting again. But I'm planning to set some time aside to really dig through the draft bill the federal government was working on to help make sure we can push that as far as we can. I think there's a lot of good progress being made, and the federal government is looking at things like permitting advance requests, which is positive, but they're still dragging their heels on a number of areas and introducing unnecessary complications, I think, around questions like, is a death reasonably foreseeable? And they want to keep that as a distinction that doesn't need to be there. Barbara, Ezra, or I think Omar joined on the line, and I see Fior. I don't recognize your name, but I recognize the profile picture. Did anyone else have thoughts or questions?
So Ian, I should probably know this because I'm on the board, but how many projects are there that we are addressing?
I don't keep a good count of how many projects we're addressing. There's always lots on the go, and one of the things that will happen is something might come up that's either a renewal of something we were working on in the past, like for example, religion in schools. Someone might email me and say, I mean, in a more normal time, someone might email me and say, my kid's teacher presented these creationist materials as a both sides thing. And we've worked historically a lot on creationism in schools, but I wouldn't call it an active project since it's largely been one, but it crops up every so often. On the other hand, there's lots of kind of back burner projects. Some are like sub projects of a major project. So following off our work on legislative prayers, there has been a couple extra reports produced. One is going to, or two are actually being submitted for publication in peer-reviewed journals. So we'll have to see if those get accepted and published. And one that is almost ready to release on our website. It's just the question is it a good time to release content when that's not related to coronavirus? So I'll have to come back with a better answer than there's always lots on the go and there's always more. One of the things that I was actually curious to get people's thoughts on, one that's come up is there's this question around the subsidies that are going out to businesses. The Canadian employer wage subsidy, I think, is the main one where the government is paying 75% of a salary for any business whose profits have dropped or whose revenue has significantly dropped because of COVID. And that's, you can have strong opinions for or against that policy. It's probably a reasonable one given the situation. And it's also going out to charities. And this means religious organizations are qualifying for it. And so the question is, should we be outraged about this or mad about this? Because this is a direct subsidy from the federal government to religious organizations. Now, it's not targeting religious groups, so they're on equal ability to apply as, say, we would be. Our revenues haven't dropped, to my understanding, and as far as I can tell. But given that the test isn't trying to target religion, is it still something that secularists, for example, would raise questions about or be upset about? I'm curious to hear anyone on the line's thoughts on that, because that's something that does come up, and I have been asked about it, at least on our Facebook page. I saw Murray's hand.
I guess just commenting on that, in order for us to be able to make a good decision on that, one can understand the whole basis of it, given the extenuating times we're in now. From a public policy point of view, one could argue that you want to get out as much money to as many people as possible. So therefore, religious organizations are part of that. And there is no real means testing for that. So, it makes it open. So you could have a parish in a small town in Alberta or Saskatchewan getting money because, they may be helping out or whatever, and you can get the Catholic church, I guess, that's $170 billion. So I guess in terms of that, what I'm getting at is that one of the ways that we may question that is, and again, I seem to know more about the United States than I do here, and perhaps you can clarify that. The whole issue is that do churches in Canada file income tax? Because one of the ways you can do that to make that those programs at least accountable is obviously if organizations file tax, then you see what they did with that money, you know, in terms of that. Because as you're aware, this is a big issue in the United States. Churches and religious entities get billions of dollars and they have no accountability for that. So, you know, to me, that would be the only way, I think, from a public policy that I think all Canadians are in agreement and support money going out to help organizations and people in these dire times. But is there an accountability issue that we could raise as a question, you know, other than, you know, as a humanist and a secularist, I have serious questions about religious entities getting money. They already, you know, get money in other direct ways. So I'm just sort of posing more questions than answers, which I would like to know if we're going to make a public policy statement on it.
Yeah, those are good points, Murray, around the accountability and yeah, one of the things I've been thinking about is this is a situation where the perfect shouldn't be the enemy of the good. Like, I can really sympathize with all of the civil servants out there who are trying to figure out how do you shovel money out at people to prevent worse things from happening. You know, the government has told everyone to basically shut down to different extents. And so there is a requirement essentially on the government then to also provide for the basics of life. And just because someone works for a small congregation as the janitor and doesn't actually need to clean the toilets of the church anymore, that person still needs to feed their family. So there's a tough situation there. In terms of the accountability, I think there is an exemption for churches from filing what's called the T3010, which is the main income tax return for charities. A lot of larger churches do file it, as far as I know, and it will be followed up on then. It's not exactly income tax forms because charities are exempt from paying income tax, but it is a greater look into, for example, our profits, our revenue and expenses than you would get for a normal corporation. So any Canadian can actually go onto the Canada Revenue Agency's website and look up any registered charity and see what their returns have been for the last many years as are up there. You can, you know, spy on our returns. They're public and we do try to share them or link to them through our own website. So yeah, it will be a good question to see and how well they account for that. And that is something to think about. I see Ezra raised a hand.
So one thing that I know, again, like Murray, I may raise more questions than answers, which I hate to do, but the whole issue of religious organizations for me starts with the Constitution, because in Canada, freedom of religion is a constitutionally protected right. Why do we have a specific protection for religion? Like, if we have to name the things that the Constitution protects, for example, why don't we have freedom of fashion? I mean, you know, it's just ridiculous that by targeting religion as a specific freedom, they are protecting one type of freedom without targeting others. I mean, and then you go with issues with religious symbols in Quebec, where, you know, I have the right to wear my Gucci hat, but not my Muslim hat, not my Sikh hat. What's the difference? So if you protect one, I mean, you should have freedom of fashion, freedom of gastronomy, you know, I mean, it's unlimited. The whole point is you should have freedom of thought, and that's it. Anything that is not prohibited is free. And then you have issues here with ICBC having to have a special commission set to be able to investigate people that want to wear religious symbols, like Pastafarians. They had to do a special investigation to see if that Pastafarian guy that we had him, he came to one of our meetings, if he actually was violating his own religion by driving without a calendar on his head. They had to do research and have an investigation done on whether he drives with a calendar or not, whether that is part of his religious texts. It's a big problem, the fact that since the Constitution protects religion, then there's this whole category of religion that is different from other type of thought. So it's a complicated issue, and I basically think that protection of religion should be removed from Constitution or any kind of universal human rights. It should be freedom of thought, period.
Right. Yeah. Thanks, Ezra. One of the things when I was on Michael Spratt's podcast a while ago, I think talking about Trinity Western University's the case there at the Supreme Court of Canada, he brought up exactly that same point. Why is freedom of religion singled out in there? This is section 2 of the charter that I have above me. So it says that, everyone has the following fundamental freedoms: freedom of conscience and religion, and B, freedom of thought, belief, opinion, and expression, including freedom of the press and communication, freedom of peaceful assembly, and freedom of association. And those are subject to reasonable limits in a democratic society, which is why we can't freely assemble right now. So it is nice to at least see in the Canadian context that conscience and religion are recognized together. There's actually not a lot of jurisprudence on what does freedom of conscience means. I think there's a few cases out of prisons where ethical vegans, for example, refuse to eat meat, and they do get the right to a vegetarian meal and don't need to place that on religious grounds. They can say that's my ethical commitment. I don't know if the courts have looked at what freedom of thought, belief, and opinion mean, but they do spend a lot of time on freedom of expression, obviously, and finding the limits within there. I think where freedom of religion comes into these human rights documents is through history. When you look at the history of religious wars, it's kind of if we agree that, if we can get competing factions of the Protestants and Catholics and Muslims and Hindus and Sikhs and other religious groups to all agree to let each other be, that's kind of the compromise we got to, and that's where freedom of religion came from, at least in the English context. I do agree that it needs to be viewed broadly, and I think emphasizing freedom of conscience and religion as it's written in our charter is a way to at least get around that, because I don't think it's going anywhere anytime soon, at least. Barbara, did I see you trying to motion to say something?
I've forgotten what I was going to ask, but this is the first time I've gotten the Zoom to work for me. So I'm just learning it. Thanks. I did have a question about the Municipal Prayers Project and the volunteering. Can you approximate how much time it would involve?
I think it's very scalable. So similar to transcribing prayers from the BC legislature, you can do a little bit, or you can sink hours and hours and hours and just do lots more. So to look into a single municipality probably takes 5 to 20 minutes. So it'll be looking up their council website, finding the minutes from their, a random meeting to see if it says that they started with prayers, and then trying to find the inaugural meeting, like the first meeting after an election when they try to swear everyone in. That's where they often do something more pompous involving prayers. And so it's something that if you only have a couple hours, you can definitely help with, or if you generally sit on your hands and need something to occupy a lot of time. Like we had people transcribe 5 prayers and we had people transcribe hundreds. So these projects are really good for scalability in that way. I'm just going to check the chat. I think Dan left a message there. Have religious organizations seen a decrease in their revenue, and how do we know? So religious organizations are much like, how do I close this chat thing anyway? Much like the BCHA historically, where a lot of our revenue came from passing the hat at in-person meetings. Our revenue has largely shifted online, but we do see money come in from those in-person meetings. You kind of have to, I don't know exactly how you fully test in the short term if these organizations have seen a decrease in revenue. And one of the other big problems for a lot of charities, I don't know as much about religious charities, it varies I think by the religion, but their revenue isn't constant through the year. A lot of charities will have very quiet times. December is generally a very big fundraising month, and then whenever their gala and other big fundraisers are. So charities are struggling a little bit to think about whether to apply to these benefits, because they have to look at their fiscal situation kind of on a larger scale. Luckily, I think you can apply for these benefits in retroactively if you see that in 4 months that actually your money is significantly decreased. You can go back. Churches do have to file all the money that they took in as income on their T3010 next year. And I think that's when the CRA, just like people who are applying for the CERB benefit right now, who said, I've lost most of my income and I need this $2,000 a month. Right now, you're kind of just attesting, you're swearing on a little online checkbox that you've lost that income. And it'll be up to the CRA to look at your income taxes next year and decide if you actually do owe a lot of taxes. So I think we're going to see a very tense political situation next year when people are dinged for mistakenly asking and taking this money. But that's kind of outside our wheelhouse. Is there anyone, Jonathan, Omar, or anyone who hasn't spoken yet who had something they wanted to add? No? All right, Dan, did you have another follow-up?
The reason I was asking about that, you asked about, where you pointed out that how do we feel about charities receiving monies from the government? And 2 organizations that came to mind who I think do good work in the community is the Salvation Army and Union Gospel. I think they provide food and shelter. So there's some, I think, real benefit to the public from them. So I could sort of see them requesting money from the government if they saw a drop in their revenues that supported these activities. I wouldn't have a problem with them receiving that money, but I sure wouldn't want to see them receiving money to do their evangelizing or their religious education and all that bull as well. So I'm just curious, have they seen any drop in their revenues, and how would we know?
Yeah, like I said, it's probably going to be a matter of following up after through their tax returns. The one issue with more the Salvation Army than Union Gospel Mission is, to my knowledge, is how deeply tied evangelism is to their mission. Like every element of it is a matter of promoting it. And I've heard stories of, for example, even within some of these housing, social housing projects that are run by religious organizations, that there is varying levels of real and perceived coercion to participate in religious activities in those situations, and that's not great. I mean, I think the ideal solution from a secularist point of view would be that these social services should be provided by secular nonprofits or the government directly, in which case those questions go away. Or where these religious groups do want to provide them, they can provide them for their members but it's kind of an extra situation that isn't relied upon by the broader social safety net. I see one additional note in the chat from Fior saying, freedom of religion is what keeps majority religions from stomping on minorities. Some members of religion are well known for aggressive attacks and lies to further their agenda. That's absolutely true. It's also true that they'll apply those similar tactics against atheists and the non-religious, and freedom of religion has been interpreted to protect the non-religious. Freedom from religion is included as freedom of religion. I'm just looking at the time. I see that brings us to half an hour, which is, I feel like, a good amount for a week. I see additional hand from Ezra. Sorry, Ezra, I didn't realize if that was a forgot to unhand, but I'll let you have one. And I saw another hand from Murray.
Quick question. I know you're a member of BCCLA board, in the board. Regarding the constitutionality of freedom of religion, just I ask you a question. Based on the Canada hate speech laws, do you think that, I know that a lot of these things are there for historical reasons. If a Bible were written today, or a Quran for that matter, I would think they will be considered hate speech. I mean, many of the passages certainly would qualify as hate speech. I think they are allowed for historical reasons. What would you think if somebody will come up with the exact same, just a book like that that we've never had before? Wouldn't it qualify as hate speech?
I won't speak on behalf of the BC Civil Liberties Association because it's a complicated positions within that organization. I'm not a spokesperson for it. I'm just a representative on the board. But as my own view, I do know that the hate speech laws in Canada have an exemption for religious books and for religious held positions. And that's something I think we and other secularist groups has highlighted is if, regardless of your feeling on hate speech laws and the legitimacy of them, if we're going to have them, there shouldn't be a caveat. They should be secular and applied across the board. I do know the bar is high. The bar is very high. And so a pass, I don't actually know that, for example, the Old Testament, parts of which are, I agree, pretty homophobic and vile and misogynistic, if it would even qualify, if it reaches that high bar, because it is like, it has to be very targeted.
Well, it says that homosexuals should be put to death if they practice their, sexual encounters. So it's very clear.
Yeah. Maybe it just doesn't repeat it enough. I don't know. But yeah, it's not one I want to debate right now too much because it's complicated.
Okay.
A couple more notes from the chat. Dan has got a note about the Sunday meetings, that if you want to join the online Sunday meetings, email him at dan_hanna@telus.net. Prisoners have a conscious choice for arguing for a special diet. I think I did mention that in terms of freedom of conscience. Murray, did you want the last word? Did I see your hand?
Yeah, just, I think we all concur, probably with Ezra in terms of the whole thing about, freedom of religion being put in the Constitution. I mean, the answer for that is very simple. It's just pure political power. That's, and where it came from in terms of the power of religious organizations. It's not being based on some kind of rational discussion and legal framework of how you would properly do it. It's just pure political power. And until, we know, 70% of BC are not religious, and yet there's all kinds of religious, benefits and so forth that everybody else doesn't get. So, Ian, I have two sort of organizational questions, which I'd like to ask, but I'll ask them at the very end because I just want other people to make sure they've had their time.
I mean, I think we're at the end, so if
Okay.
there's no one else who wants to jump in, which I'm not seeing, and I don't see any comments from the few people on Facebook, so I think you can ask them now.
Okay, so the first question I have, and I was talking to Dan the other day, is there a reason for how things are? Dan was saying the other day that we have 300 members. On Vancouver meetups, we show 1,363. like, is there a reason for the different numbers? Like, they're so far apart. What is the reason for that? Is there a reason?
Yeah, it's the same it's the same as why we have 2,500, I want to say, people who like our page on Facebook, or how, you know, 2,000 who follow us on Twitter. It's very easy to click follow, like, on a social media platform, including Meetup. To join is an extra bar that thankfully 300 and some odd people have taken the time to go to our website, fill out the application form, and throw at least $10 our way.
Okay, so it's not a membership. Is it a membership way that we count? Like,
yeah, so when we say we have 300 members, those are the people who have applied for and paid for their memberships. We do have people who have donated to us but not become members. Perhaps they just like a part of our work. You know, becoming a member is a bit of a commitment to supporting and facilitating the organization.
right.
So it's not for everyone, though we do try to encourage everyone to support us at bchumanist.ca/join.
Okay. My second question is, as you know, you've heard me mention from time to time, I work with United Church here on the North Shore. They have a very active climate change program. Like, I mean, this is a case where, you know, my stance on religion, but these people have one of the most active community climate change education programs. Do you remember a couple of years ago, who was the guy that came? It was Simon Fraser University has a division faculty, the guy that came and talked to us about the renewable industry and how it was growing and changing. Am I correct on that? It's now been I thought it was Simon Fraser University. I tried to look it up and I can't find it. Am I wrong?
I have a list of all the past people who've been invited, and I'll look that up.
When you have a moment, and just send me an email, because I want to, I've been talking to them, and I mentioned this, and they're interested. They're trying to find out, because they always get guest speakers and whatever. So that's the context of why I'm trying to find out, and I can't remember. I think it was Simon Fraser University. So if you have a minute, just send me an email.
All right, I will definitely look into that. I think I saw that email, but it went into a box. Dan.
I have that list of all the speakers we've had in the past.
Okay, good.
So I can go back and look at that, and I can pass that on to Marie. Okay.
All right. Well, I think that'll wrap it up for this week. Hopefully these are still valuable. Weekly is quite frequent, but I think it's kind of fun to do at least for 30 or 40 minutes while we're all being asked to stay at home. So thank you all for joining. I will see some of you next week. Otherwise, have a good week and take care.